Have you ever been scrolling through apartment listings online, seen the crazy high prices, and then looked at the official inflation numbers and thought, wait a second, these don't add up? Well, you're not wrong. There's this massive, mysterious lag between what's happening with rents in the real world and what the national data says. Today, we're going to be detectives and crack this exact case.
All right, here's our game plan. First, we'll set the scene and lay out the puzzle. Then we'll introduce our three main suspects, the reasons for the delay. After that, we'll dive into how researchers built a model to investigate this whole thing, see how that model stacks up against reality, and finally, talk about what this all means for the future.
So, first things first, why are we even talking about this? Why does a lag in rent data matter so much? Well, it's because if you don't understand rent, you basically can't understand inflation in our economy right now. It's that important.
Just take a look at this. Shelter, which is mostly rent, makes up a whopping 35% of the Consumer Price Index, or CPI. That's the main tool we use to measure inflation. You can see right here that even as inflation for everything else started to come down, that shelter line stayed stubbornly high, keeping the overall CPI number way up.
And this isn't some fringe idea. The famous economist Greg Mankiw put it perfectly. He said if you want to understand the inflation story of the past few years, it's all about shelter. It really is the main character in this economic drama.
Okay, to really get to the bottom of this, we need to be super clear about two different things. There's the official CPI shelter number, which measures what all tenants are paying on average, including folks who've been in the same apartment for years. And then there are market rents from places like Zillow, which track the asking price for new leases. They are fundamentally measuring two different slices of the pie.
And here it is, the mystery right in front of you. You see that sharp spike and then the steep drop? That's market rent data from Zillow. It went on a wild ride. But look at the official CPI shelter data. It's moving so much slower, lagging behind by more than a year. And that disconnect is what gives policymakers massive headaches when they're trying to figure out what to do with the economy.
So what is going on here? What's causing this huge gap? Well, the researchers we're looking at today pinpointed three distinct reasons for this lag. Think of them as the three main suspects in our great rent mystery.
Suspect number one. Most of us are on long-term leases, right? Usually 12 months, so our rent is locked in. Suspect number two is something called rent smoothing. Landlords usually don't jack up the rent on an existing tenant to the full market rate. And suspect three is just how the government does the math. Its methodology averages out rent changes over 6 months.
Now, this isn't just some abstract academic theory. This is very real. Even the chair of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, has talked about this exact thing, how rent for existing tenants adjusts more slowly. He flat out said this causes big lags in the data.
So, to actually solve this mystery and figure out how much each of these suspects contributes, the researchers decided to build a model. They created a mathematical simulation of the entire rental market to see if they could recreate what we see in the real world.
And their model really boils down to three key numbers. They already had data for the first two, phi, which is the percentage of people on flexible month-to-month leases, and alpha, the small fraction of people who actually move each month. But the big unknown, the real key to the whole mystery, was this third variable, lambda. That represents how quickly a landlord raises the rent on an existing tenant to match what new tenants are paying.
So, let's get to the good part, the results. How did the investigation turn out? Did their model actually work? Let's see how its predictions lined up with reality.
And the answer is yes, it worked beautifully. Just look at how the model's prediction, that dotted line, almost perfectly traces the actual path of shelter inflation. It captured that slow, delayed rise and the eventual fall after the pandemic shock. It's a fantastic match.
But here's where it gets really interesting. This slide shows what happens if you take rent smoothing out of the model. So what if landlords just charged existing tenants the full market rate every time? Well, the model completely breaks. It predicts a crazy, volatile path for inflation that looks nothing like what actually happened. This is the smoking gun. It proves that rent smoothing is absolutely essential to explaining this puzzle.
So what was the magic number for lambda? What did the model tell us? The answer is 21.3%. And this is the core finding of the entire paper. It means that when your lease is up for renewal, on average, your rent only goes up about 1/5 of the way toward the current market rate. That slow, partial adjustment, that's the secret ingredient that solves the whole mystery.
Okay, so now that we have a working model that explains the past, what can it tell us about the future? Let's talk about the implications here for inflation and for thinking about real estate as an asset class.
Using their model, the authors are able to forecast where shelter inflation is headed, and what they see is a continued, slow glide path downwards. Assuming market rents stay pretty stable, their model predicts shelter inflation will hit 3.7% by the end of 2025 and then settle closer to 2.9% by the end of 2027. No sudden drops, just a long, slow cool down.
So this brings us to a really classic question, one that every finance and economics student has to grapple with. Knowing about these big lags, is rental real estate actually a good investment to protect you from inflation?
And the big takeaway here is that it all comes down to your time horizon. In the short term, no. It's actually a pretty poor inflation hedge. Those exact same lags that mess with the inflation data mean that rental income just can't keep up with the sudden spike in inflation. But over the long run, because those rents do eventually catch up to the market, it turns out to be a very effective way to hedge against inflation over many years.
And that leaves us with one last big idea to chew on. This whole investigation has shown us a huge gap between what's happening on the ground and the official data we use to make decisions. So it really makes you wonder, right? If the rent numbers are lagging reality by over a year, what other parts of the economy might have these hidden delays, telling a story about the future that we just aren't seeing in today's headlines?